Namaskara, my dear ladies and gentlemen. How are you doing today? In this video, I will try to share what we do to solve one of the common problems with almost all our clients, for which we help them overcome this challenge. The challenge of having introduced standards, processes, and systems with the adherence to those standards, systems, and processes being rather low. On the one hand, you believe that these standards, systems, and processes are going to help us in achieving sustainable, profitable growth. And on the other, you really wonder why we are not able to achieve sustainable, profitable growth. And every time there is a situation where you recognize that the standards, processes, and systems are not being adhered to or are not being followed, especially when it comes to documentation, then you start wondering what to do and then do some crisis management actions, start up some initiatives, get the teams formed and do training, etc., etc. But still, you get back to the same situation as it was earlier, where the standards, processes, and systems are not being adhered to and not being followed. Systems like CRM, for example, you have a fantastic concept to really make sure that the entire sales process becomes transparent and predictable with clear steps. But the sales executives have no interest in entering data and updating their leads, potentials in the CRM. Therefore, that information is not available, and that means that the insights from CRM cannot be really used, which means the sales growth is not happening and you wonder why. ERP is another classical case where there is a tremendous amount of effort put in to create master data structure, and the data doesn't get entered in real-time basis. Therefore, whatever that you have in ERP is just there for the sake of compliance. But in terms of using the ERP data for operational excellence, for really ensuring that the business improves, using the ERP data is not very common. Again, their data is not being entered or the masters are not being maintained. You have a new information that just remains outside ERP but not updated in the ERP. Therefore, the ERP works in its best way. MRP, for example, which is used for defining the requirement planning, is done based on some data, some information, some masters, which is not up to date. So therefore, your ERP data is not good. And of course, all of us are very, very comfortable with Excel sheets. We resort to using Excel for creating the orders. Or let us say there is a situation of customer complaint, and when you start investigating, you find out that the log entries were not done, the setup approval report was not thoroughly checked, and the periodical inspection report was not filled at all for whatever reason. Maybe there was urgency, maybe you said the guy who is working on that machine is a trainee, so he is not in a position to do that, etc., etc., etc. Therefore, again, you get into the conclusion that, look, we have a system, but people are not following it. And people would not follow. And later, all of us together as the leadership team would really understand that as a natural situation. So what else do we do? And only over the years did I realize that there are 12 factors which basically contribute to people using standards and benefiting from the standards. Let me explain that today so that I share my wisdom, and at the same time, you can use this wisdom for maybe reflecting in what's happening in your organizations and see if it's of any help to you. The first and the foremost is to make sure that the stakeholders who are involved in executing the standard are considered and are involved in creating the standard. And that is something which is extremely essential because in organizations, many of the times the standards that we put in place may be of making a lot of sense to the one who introduced the standard, whereas the one who is executing it doesn't see any sense at all. So therefore, this dialogue to involve them, discuss and understand what their perspective is before the standard is done is extremely important for the standard to function. The second is to make sure that it is integrated and coherent, and only you make a standard where it is really life critical. There is no point in making standard and creating a metric KPI for everything that happens in the organization. There has to be some amount of priority. Ensure that whatever standard you do is integrated end to end. Let me just give you an example here. It's not only about integrating the standard, it's also about integrating the practices which are accompanied with the standard. This example which I'm talking about is something I'm sure many of you can resonate with that. As a production manager, I want to know what is the on time and full delivery for the day. So I have asked my team to tell me at the end of the day, every day, what is the on time and full delivery. Or as a managing director, I want to know how much amount of turnover did we achieve today. Now, these two numbers are obviously available in ERP, but I would feel more comfortable in getting a WhatsApp message or maybe a text message, which unfortunately need not be done at all. You can directly get the report from ERP and that will give you the actual up-to-date situation. But many of us not used to it. Therefore, we get this report on a WhatsApp message, or everybody is comfortable with WhatsApp, right? Or maybe as a text message. And later the guys who are giving this message know very well that the boss is not interested in the ERP. Therefore, the ERP data doesn't get updated. At the end of the month, when we are to possibly close the accounts, then we realize that a lot of things are not updated. Then there is a hectic to get it updated. Imagine a situation if there was a clear understanding and coherence and integrity in whatever we are doing. In telling that, look, I only need the ERP data, I don't need anything else. Then automatically the behavior in the organization would be created to enter the ERP data on time. That is something which is something very fundamental, but many a times it doesn't happen in organizations. Because of us human, we are basically interested in adopting the most comfortable path for us instead of really looking at the bigger picture many a times. The next, which is most important, is to really benchmark, to understand what is the best available option in the industry, so that what we do as a standard is not sub industry levels. At least we should be better than what is available in the industry. Therefore, benchmarking is extremely important before doing a standard. And the most important thing, next one, everything is most important. I keep telling most important, so you can understand why these 12 are most important. Everything is equally important. Most important is to make sure that it is relevant and up to date. This is again a classical situation. You know, in manufacturing, especially when I would go to the shop floor to find out what the actual activity is being done, I normally go with my memory. I say that this is what has to be done. Therefore, I don't really refer any document nor a standard. I just go with my memory, and whatever I remember, based on that, I'm trying to understand whether the guy is doing the job correctly or not, or he's performing in the way that we have defined or not. But there again, if I have the habit of taking the standard, using the standard as a reference, because I don't need to remember everything. That is why we made a standard. Let me use our brain to create and to improve whatever condition that is existing instead of remembering the standard. So let's say I go there and pick up the standard and start checking whether he's doing it rightly or not. Then the need to keep the standard up to date automatically becomes evident. That's the next key success factor, to make sure that the standard is relevant and up to date. Practicality and making sure that the standard can be really met is again another interesting topic which is extremely important for any standard to work. I remember a lot of control plans. I think those of you from manufacturing know control plans. Let us say the size of the tray is 44 and the control plan specifies that you need to check every 50 pieces. A very, very common thing I have come across quite regularly. And how do you ensure that the 50 pieces are over when your tray size is 44 and it's difficult to count? So therefore, the standard which you did, the control plan which you did to control every 50 pieces is something which is totally impractical. Then the next one, which is extremely interesting point which I have realized, is that the standard has to be clear and unambiguous. Now, this is again a very interesting situation to be in, because many in the industry believe that the standards have to be simple and they should be very easy. You articulate it, make it simpler, make it simpler. So once you make it simpler, the thoroughness of the standard many a times gets lost. Of course, there is definitely a possibility of making a standard simpler by making it more concise. But most of the time, the thoroughness is lost. To make it simpler, in the whole bargain, the standard becomes ambiguous. That means everybody can perceive the standard in his or her own way. When that is the case, then the implementation of the standard is a question, and adherence to the standard is a question, and making sure that the standard is being followed also is a question. Therefore, the standard has to be clear and unambiguous so that everybody perceives it in the same way. Like in the case of a drawing. There is a drawing for a simple component which would be having lesser characteristics. The drawing looks simple. Whereas for complex components, the drawing may have 80, 90 characteristics. It looks really kind of a maze, but still nobody complains because so many characteristics are required for the drawing to be unique so that everybody perceives the drawing in the same manner. That's the next success factor which I have come across to make it clear and unambiguous. It has to be, of course, user-friendly and handy. User-friendly standards is something which is very interesting. Again, I come back to manufacturing. Let us imagine we have a particular operation where the control plan says that you need to check the height using the height gauge which is kept in the standards room on a table, measuring table, and the machine is located maybe 30 meters away from the standards room. Now, the operator's job is to go to the standards room every 3 hours and check it on the height gauge and come back. Now, at the same time, you've given him a task that you cannot stop the machine. You cannot go away from the workplace, and we have put a webcam to monitor what he is doing. So, this particular standard is something which is done for the sake of making a paper, but in reality, it is not user-friendly at all. He cannot really make sure that it works. He cannot make sure that he can adhere to the standard. So make the standard user-friendly and make it handy. And again, here, could it be some kind of a document that people can carry in their pockets so that you can check it? I say it is possible because you need to do a standard, you need to define a process or a instruction or a target only for those most critical items of the business. There's no point in doing everything. The next one is to make it flexible and adaptable. The standard has to be flexible because the reality is always different than what we assume. One of my bosses in Germany used to say that plan is made to change because a plan can never be 100% the same. You keep changing till the time you execute it so that you keep on narrowing down the variation as you come closer to the execution date. And that is what planning is all about. Therefore, flexibility and ability for the standard to adapt itself to the circumstance is extremely important. The next, which is equally important, is to make it specific only to those which are most important to the business and make it measurable. Why measurable? Because unless you are able to measure, nothing gets done. There's a popular saying which says that whatever gets measured gets done. So therefore, measuring whatever you did as a standard is extremely important. The next one is to make sure that it is enforceable and verifiable. So what do you mean by enforceable? That means the standard which you have done can be enforced. That means somebody can check, somebody can verify it. For that, the first step is to be able to be executing the standard yourself as a manager. You should be able to execute the standard without any difficulty. Only then can you explain, can you enforce the standard. How are you going to verify it? That question is something which is extremely important. The next one, possibly the most important one, is to make sure that whatever be the standard gets checked, gets verified, validated in a very, in the next immediate step is the ideal situation. So here it's important to have a quick closed loop control for the standard that we have introduced to make sure that the standard, whatever we have introduced, is something which is being regulated and controlled and ensure that it is working in the next immediate step or the next immediate steps. The last one, which is of course something which all of you can relate to, is to make sure that the standard is continually improving. You never should have a standard which is stagnant, which is static. Continual improvement is something which is mandatory. Once we have the system introduced, then running a business, improving a business is just like cakewalk. You need to just update the standard, the new standard gets implemented, and you are already achieving the benefit across the organization. Well, it seems quite complex, maybe for some, and it may seem very simple for those who have implemented it. There is one more aspect which I didn't speak about, which is not really a success factor, but it's kind of a foundation, it's kind of a oxygen for a standard to work is training. Training, retraining, and retraining. That is something which is very, very important so that people are understanding what the standard is and that they can use the standard. Coming to training, we are also trainers in some way. What do we do to make sure that these 12 get internalized in organizations? For that, I use what is called as doHow, a methodology developed by me based on dialogue, which is also something similar to the Socratic methodology. Socratic method, you can call it as, instead of the didactic method where it's a monologue. What I'm doing now is monologue because, of course, I'm not in a position to interact with you. Therefore, I'm doing a monologue. But in doHow, it would be a dialogue, a Socratic method. And for that, I use multiple elements. First, I start any doHow session with attendance. Attendance is something which is extremely important for punctuality. Why is it necessary in businesses? Because in teamwork, punctuality is something which is going to kind of foster the teamwork, because that is what shows every team member that the other team member is respecting the other person's time. Of course, all of us are very busy, but we can still plan it out. And coming on time is extremely important. So we start with attendance. And after that, we have a scoreboard which talks about how each one is practicing whatever that they have learned to make sure that they internalize whatever that they learn. That's why we use a scoreboard. It's a kind of a competition. Whoever gets the maximum gets some kind of a recognition. After the scoreboard, the next element in doHow is to be able to share and explain the various files uploaded, YouTube links or the web links, so that the participants can learn at their own pace whenever they have got time. And once that is done, the next element of doHow becomes the Socratic part of the doHow, which is basically to engage in a dialogue. And the first element would be the survey. In the survey, one is basically trying to share their opinion, or it could be the key takeaways from a simulation, key takeaways from a group activity, which gets tabulated, and this tabulation itself leads to a discussion. Let us imagine that there are some key takeaways by some participant. The other day, we were talking about why people are using standards and why people are not using standards. They said you do a group activity and everybody went back to their workplaces and found out why the people whom they have assigned the standards to be used are using and why they are not using. Why they are not using? Because they didn't understand. Why they are not using? Because they didn't expect somebody to be overchecking that. They didn't know the importance. Things of that kind. And why are they using it? Because they understood the importance, they were explained well, and there is also a kind of a provision to get back in case I can't use the standard. So these learnings are tabulated. It becomes kind of a base for a dialogue to take place. That dialogue is the one which creates insights, and through the insights, one starts bridging the gap between knowing and doing. After the survey, we've got another option of doing a quiz, which is a kind of a gamification where you have multiple questions. It could be a MCP or it could be a single answer quiz where the teams participate in a quiz, again leading to a debate and a discussion because of the answers that they chose. After that, we do an assessment, which is an anonymous assessment of what their perception of the reality is. Here, one example would be a classic one, which I keep doing. There is a hypothesis that all the managers are clear of their targets, and their reports also are clear of their targets. They have been deployed very effectively. Everybody have 100% clarity, and you either have to prove the hypothesis or disprove the hypothesis. In this activity, some say that it is not true, some say it is true. And just the fact that some have said it is not true, some have said it is true, anonymously, becomes the base for a debate and a discussion. And that's when ideas come up. That's when opinions get shared. Your baggages get unloaded so that you start afresh and your mind becomes clear. So this is the platform for a discussion and a debate. That is the next element. After that, there could be individual tasks, multiple kinds of individual tasks. One of the classic ones was let us say you are imagining the market as a jungle, and how would you relate to customer acquisition in a jungle? Using an analogy. And in that case, somebody talks about jungle having a lot of animals and the lion possibly trying to catch their prey, trying to go behind the prey, and then you get an insight saying that, look, we are not really so aggressive in going behind a customer. So that itself is something which is a huge insight, a reason to discuss, reason to debate. And then you ask, what is it that needs to be done to get those customers on board? And once the individual tasks are performed, then collective tasks are performed for internalizing and for further reinforcing the wisdom and the insight that got generated in the individual tasks. Collective and individual tasks are part of a game which I developed about 5-6 years back, which I called as the doHow game. That is integrated in the workbook. And after that, one would use a checklist, for example, to define where do they stand today, and which are those good practices which are being practiced, not being practiced. That's the next activity. Once you do that, again, there is a reason for debating, because the checklist talks about the good practices, what you are doing, what you are not doing, why you are not doing, and again creates a debate among the team. When I say team, I'm talking about top floor to shop floor, everyone in the same room. We have done up to about 250 people in one room for a duration of about 2 to 3 days. I think you are right, 2 to 3 days, because we split the entire team into smaller teams of 2, 3, or 4, which are working like individual learning entities using our workbook, which is kind of an aid for delivering the Socratic methodology. That's the innovation. Therefore, everybody get to participate and everybody is enhancing their knowledge, and there is a constant share of ideas, which is what is required to create a collective culture, a collective understanding. And that's where the transformation happens. After that, one could take photos, for example, of the shop floor, of the workplace, or whatever it is, in case they go to the workplace. And once all this is done, then we have got 5 homework activities. One is to use our modules for practicing. They are guided modules, and that's what is done during handholding. Otherwise, one could be completing some tasks which have been defined for making sure that they enhance their level of working. And one could be also doing routines which are necessary for success and which are necessary for internalizing the learning. Or one could be also monitoring KPIs. This is again an art. How do you monitor KPIs? There's no point in monitoring all the KPIs. There's no point in monitoring KPIs all the time. One needs to understand at what clock speed you need to monitor and what clock speed you need to report. And that's the learning which happens during KPI monitoring, again as a homework. And lastly, an audit can also be done to make sure that some of the standards which have been introduced are being practiced. So this is the doHow methodology which we use to implement the 12 success factors of standards as one of the examples. Similarly, we have multiple, programs for implementing or achieving revenue growth, for increasing profitability, for enhancing a career, for making a startup succeed better, etc. Thanks a lot for listening in case you did till the end, and please do check out your own workspace and use whatever I said as insights for understanding where do you stand. And if you want, you can always write to me anytime. My number and email are shown in the video, and also will be there in the description. Thanks a lot, and all the very best.